I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you about the Regen Farmers Mutual and what we've been working on.
I'm grateful we can have this chat and I can see what you're doing.
Excellent. Well, our introduction to the Regen Farmers Mutual, good for the farm, good for the farmer. And what we've come to learn is that the environmental markets that are emerging in Australia are set to be worth many, many billions of dollars. And they are, this rapidly growing sector is something that most small farmers can't access. And when they're looking at the opportunity, one of the opportunities for them is to aggregate together. And that helps them to bring down the costs of a transaction, but it also helps them to bring together a product that's a bigger scale of the. Now, the other thing keeping the farmers out of the market is green tape, greenwash, and the brokers. So one of the well-known brokers in the soil carbon space is offering farmers no upfront costs, but wants 80% of the carbon. And, by contrast, what we're suggesting when farmers get together and they own their own brokerage firm that helps them aggregate and take to market, we're suggesting that the farmers would keep 80%. 10 cents in the dollar would stay with a farm group that farmer belonged to. That could be a local group or an industry group or a group of practice like biodynamic or organic or holistic farmers. And then there's 10 cents in every dollar that's required, we think, to cover costs like the marketing and legal and execution and technology costs to make the brokerage possible. And how we came to this wasn't by accident. So we worked with 80 odd farmers across 3 different courses between August 2020 and March 2021. And through that, we created with them the business model that they thought they would use as farmers and how they wanted it to act. And some of the things that came out, we embedded as principles into the constitution of the brokerage. And those things are things that can't be replicated by a corporate-owned broker. So we have this idea of engaging local first and delivering maximum value to our members. We have this thing about members owning and controlling their data and permissioning it for their ends as opposed to other people's ends. And you just won't see these things put into the constitution, the very formation documents of other brokerages. As a result, we're able to work as a scaled national body, but working with local groups around Australia, we're able to then support them to bring to market environmental goods and services that are relevant for them. So we've got now 8 to 10 of these, what we're calling pilot transactions, that are in various stages of forming. And one of them that explain what the MU does is the Bellinger Farmers Network. These are land care networks come together to look at flood mitigation. And the way that they're doing that is they're aggregating farmers in 3 different environments. So in the sort of catchment area where you can move, transition from, say, set stocking to time-controlled grazing, with the effect of creating increased organic carbon in the soil, which increases soil carbon and water holding capacity. So when rainfall happens, more of it gets put into the landscape. And then further down that catchment of farmers in the riparian zone, it had been cleared over industrial and farming and residential reasons. And so the result is you could now do, by using biodiversity offsets, revegetation, recreating habitat, but importantly slowing floodwaters when floods are happening, and they're happening like 12 in the last 14 years in the Bellinger River. And then you get down to the coastal farmers. Now they're having to deal with the interoperability of rising sea levels and greater levels of inundation, built infrastructure, salt marshes, wetlands, and changing environments. They need habitat corridors as well. And so what we're able to do is to get the soil carbon that the rural farmers are paid for through ERF or voluntary markets. We're able to get the revegetation that the valley farmers need in order to slow the water through the biodiversity offset market. And we're able to put 1 and 1 together to equal 3. And we're now actively talking with the Department of Transport in New South Wales about them paying for flood mitigation, paying directly for farmers to make this transition of agriculture. And so this gives them, the farmers that are engaged across the valley, an additional revenue stream that's opened up to them because they're aggregated and going to market, and they're getting rewarded from the traditional markets. But by acting at a landscape level, they're opening up another market or another set of co-benefits that they can directly earn from, that they'd be excluded from through other brokerages. Now, the infrastructure of the mutual, it sits upon, obviously being ground up and for the farmers, by the farmers, but there's some technology at play here as well. So we're working with Freehills and their digital law group to create a smart stewardship agreement, and that enables the farmer to sign up to a legal agreement in legal language that could be for carbon or biodiversity or conservation of habitat, whatever is in their context. But it's a standardized agreement with the appendices changed, but those operating terms of the standardized agreement, they can have a digital equivalent of them, which can then connect to devices, or the farmer can permission data to them so that they can read the financial agreements that underpin the environmental goods and services that have been transacted. Now, in plain language, what that means is that unlike a normal farming contract where I say I'm going to grow a ton of wheat and I sell a ton of wheat, and when I do that, buyer has the ton of wheat and I've got the money. In environmental markets, it's typically like 25 years of 1-year agreements that are conditional upon practices and measurements having been done and what has been sold actually still being in existence. And you need those things to feed into the digital environments so that you can use IoT sensors or satellite imagery or on-the-ground field assessments to verify that the carbon or the biodiversity or that the benefit is there for the farmer and for the environment. And this opens up other abilities, like you can imagine farmers being able to tie the provenance of their food and fibre to the origin of the environmental goods and services in their property and provide a really compelling green argument, or at least provide a pathway for people to see why they can make those green provenance stories count with consumers. So that's all under the point of telling you about that technology, is to say that that helps because we've got this Regen digital farmer, which enables the farmer to connect their data, whatever that data is, into their environmental contracts so that they can get paid for environmental goods and services. And additionally, we've got this nature fund. And the nature fund works or is required in the first place because we bring on a farmer at a time within an area, but the market likes to buy in bigger tranches. So to keep the liquidity there so that we can bring on individual farmers, you have to have a fund. And when you have a fund, you can also tranche up for different buyers. So somebody might be for carbon and somebody might be for a whole of farm score, which takes into account environmental goods and services, but also looks at something like animal welfare and energy use on the farm. And we know those whole of farm scores are like appealing to retailers like Coles and Woolies, whereas we know that carbon might be appealing to the polluters that have, offsets to make, but no real interest in animal welfare. So you can tranche up in the fund different product layers for different buyers and different markets, and it gives you ultimate flexibility to use regulated markets or voluntary markets. And the other benefit of aggregation is that you end up with greater compliance by farmers for farmers, that they're co-party to impacts that are at a landscape level. So you're getting greater economic outcomes, you're getting better farming outcomes, and you're getting better environmental outcomes through aggregation. And it leads to rewards and incentives instead of sticks and regulation, which we know that governments are prone to want to regulate everything. And in the process, we get perverse outcomes. So the mutual delivers value across, a whole range of areas. We help groups organise and engage locally, and then they define the environmental goods and services that are composed by their various farmer members, and then they can sell that to the Nature Fund, which can then market them. And then the execution and delivery of those stewardship agreements into 25 years and beyond is all secured and owned by the farmers themselves as members of the mutual. So where we're headed to our next steps, so we've got a company limited by guarantee called the Regen Farmers Mutual. It will establish the Nature Fund in the next 12 to 14 months. It's a big deal to do that. There's no point in doing that until we've got, actual carbon and biodiversity and things to sell. So it's sort of for later, but the Regen Digital Farmer, we're working on that currently. So in October, we're going to be opening up to farmers, the mutual, and the way they become members of the mutual is by participating in our crowdfunding and the purchase of an on-farm environmental assessment. And the on-farm environmental assessment will be promoted through our partners. So we're partnered with Landcare Victoria, Landcare New South Wales, with AgForce in Queensland, and we've got various projects in South Australia and Tasmania as well within the pilots. These groups, these sort of land care size groups, are really important because they've already been working together on weed eradication, erosion control, salinity management, creating connected corridors, revegetation projects. And so this is a way of monetising what they've been doing. And for the farm groups, for those sort of local land care coordinator types, this is a way for them to get paid over and above the 0.6 per week that they're getting paid for being a land care coordinator, but fully in alignment with the objectives of land care and the objectives of the farmers. And then the way that farmers are individually coming into membership of the mutual and to the environmental markets is they get an environmental farm assessment, and it tells them what their environmental goods and services could be worth. Now, the way that that's assessed is down to a collection of data, and we collect that data from the farmer entering it, from GIS maps that we compose, and in-field assessments. And then that data, the farmer has control of that data, but they permission various organisations, and those organisations can give them a view as to what the environmental value is according to their method. So Accounting for Nature has a method of econs by which they measure, say, soils or native vegetation. FarmLab does a soil carbon report for farmers. You can get a standing carbon report from the Carbon Farming Foundation, a whole of farm score from AgForce using their AgCare methodology, a regenerative agricultural food label that's ISO compliant, along with a food score and a farm score. You can get monitoring and management inputs from land to market, which is the holistic management people, and you could get your interest offset. So how much per $1,000 can you save based on the environmental goods and services you've got underpinning your loan agreements? And this all comes together to give a farmer a picture of what is the most likely way for them, given their context, to access environmental markets. And then the role of those farm groups is to help those farmers aggregate to reach a commercial size. And that, Patrice, is my pitch. And so I'd welcome any questions if you have them.
Noise happening, barking happening, and I turned it on mute. Hey, firstly, it's a big idea. It's a very big idea and a big tick, Andy, for trying to bring all these really complex things together. That's the first thing. It sounds like you've had some good progress already, so we can always learn from those early adopters. Would you say when somebody first hears of a mutual that they might think co-op? Could you give me a comparison on where it sits with farmers getting together and functioning with a co-op, firstly?
Yes, a co-op.
Similar or nothing?
Yeah, very similar in that they're both member owned and controlled with the democratic basis of one member, one vote. And I think the differences then are co-ops are state-regulated mutuals under the Corporations Act. When you're dealing with each of them, you've got different capital instruments, and lawyers are more familiar with mutuals than they are with cooperatives.
Okay, good. I think if someone has ever been part of a co-op, you'd probably be psychologically tuning into the capacity of a mutual, though. That was my first thought. The Regen Digital Farm data process, would you say, because this is a pretty big thing to be able to have access to all the data. I feel like we've been talking forever about how we're going to really get cluey on all the good works we do. How much do you think that is a powerful tool that a farmer is going to need anyway? And this is a good collective way of tuning into that capacity. That's one question.
Yeah, good question. So there's an enormous amount of interest in agricultural and environmental data. And farmers, are traditionally using their data day to day, but not for hedging on food prices. But that is exactly what other forces would like to know farmer data for, so that they can make money out of things like the food security. And I think farmers, have an interesting capacity to leverage their data for a social good and an agronomic good. And what they've been missing is a compelling reason for farmers to get engaged with that market. And along comes the environmental goods and services, and it provides a use case for why farmers would be willing and wanting and desiring to connect their production data to their environmental impact. And as a result, you can now connect food and its provenance and its sovereignty to the farmers. And you can, connect the environmental goods and services, or the lack of them, that farmers are producing when they're producing these food and fibres that we demand as consumers. I think of it as a critical piece of future infrastructure. And I'm really proud that the farmers can manage and control that piece of infrastructure collectively. I think it's one of the highlights of the Regen Farmers Mutual.
So you had a diagram there. One person gets 5 litres, gets 25 farmers. Is 25 a number that you think you have to have a group work? Like, were those numbers there because they were minimum numbers?
No, they're very indicative. So already it comes down to this context. So we're dealing with sort of 900 farmers in the Riverland area into a single transaction around doing good with their water and biodiversity, not much carbon out there. Whereas the East Coast transactions for flood mitigations, we're talking about such small land holdings, typically, 140 hectares or less. Whereas in areas like the Wimmera, we're talking thousands of hectares. Yeah.
Okay. So is it the area, when you're dealing with an area, doing work on an area, is it acreage that matters more than number of farmers? So you could have 3 farmers together with a big acreage.
Potentially.
Am I right there?
Yeah, you're right there. And what we think... Go for it.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, we think that the idea is that there's around 15% of a catchment. If you are working in a local land care catchment, you need about 15% of the landscape to start making a material environmental impact at landscape scale. But that might be the time that you can open a transaction which enables the first farmers to get an economic return. But you want to keep that transaction open so that 16 through to 95% of that catchment could also join in a coordinated response to changing the hydrology, because the more the better in that sense.
Yeah, okay. So it is a little bit of a hard ask, isn't it? You need people excited about the idea who are responsible for some land in an area of importance within that catchment. Yeah, that's correct. With capacity to grow. Okay, so that's quite a defining thing. The other thought is people own land for all these different reasons. Some are early in their land ownership journey. Some may be thinking, I really want to get out if only I could, sort of mind. Do you think you really cater for people that have a business, successful or not, thriving or not, to still participate in this because it's completely separate to the money that you're earning in your core business? This is an extra. Should people think about it as an extra?
At the moment, you could justify why they do, because you get paid for your food and fibre separately to your environmental goods and services. But if anything, the markets like for LNG and steel tell you that there's like brown LNG, brown steel, and there's green LNG, green steel, and the price difference is like 75%. So if you've got red meat and green red meat, which sounds terrible, but go with the, and it's worth 75 cents, 75% at the till for, or the farm gate for the farmer, well, then you're going to incorporate your environmental markets very much into your production of food and fibre. And so I think it's currently justifiable to see them as separate enterprises on your property. But I think the way that market will evolve in dozen years, 10 years, I don't have a crystal ball, will be to see those environmental impacts integrated with the productive capacity of the farm.
Okay, but I could see farmers saying, look, I took my farm because I'm a maverick. I like doing what I like doing on my land, but I see the point. I believe in climate change. I believe in drawdown. So, tick, I'm interested in what you've got, but don't tell me what I'm doing on my farm because it's my baby and I'm doing on my farm. Is there room for this person in the mutual?
Absolutely. So everybody has a process. In our view, the process is emerging as we're working with farm groups. But typically, there's a farm assessment, and then the farmer creates their farm plan, and their farm plan is to them. What are the objectives and actions and outcomes they're after, and how they're going to measure them. That is contextual based on their farm. But, before they can get into a stewardship agreement, usually there's a joint supply agreement and a term sheet and an agreement to sign up to an impacts and measures regime. Now, these things add value to the farmer, but they aren't enforcing what that farmer's plan is. I think there's a mirrored effect, a digital twin, if you want, a mirrored effect.
Okay, it's the agreement that you have with your mutual is not in any way attached to your title, your farm title. So do you sell? Yeah. Go on.
There are some programs. So if you're in Queensland with the LRF and you do a carbon deal, you're required to attach it to your title. And as a farmer, if we were to broker a deal that was ultimately to the LRF and a condition of sale was that it was attached to title, you'd have the opportunity of taking that sale with the client or not. But if you accepted the sale, then you would have to accept the conditions of sale. But the LRF is the only regime, and the ERF nationally, that require you to attach carbon to your title. Other markets don't have that requirement.
So how does your mutual agreement fit then? It's with the farmer. What happens if the farmer sells their land? What happens to that agreement?
Yeah, so they're put into perpetuity through different mechanisms. So the legal mechanism on the sale of the environmental goods, if it's attached with title or without title, that still needs to be handled. But we haven't formed yet, so we haven't had real world experience of succession issues, but we know that they're significant. Yeah.
Because there is something for me that sounds powerful. If a valley, a catchment, has made a commitment, the group of landowners in 2021 have made a commitment to doing a 15% increase in biodiversity, say, in this area, that somehow, and there was support from it, that it could live on. You'd like to psychologically feel that this ambitious idea amongst landowners can live on regardless of actual land ownership.
I think that's possible through another mechanism as well. So we've been working with the NRM regions, and they have NRM region plans, catchment level plans. Yeah. And these have been, well, when talking with NRM regions people, what they don't like about the current carbon market is it might actually have perverse outcomes. So they're incentivizing blue gum forests, and that's replacing a monoculture with what was a native polyculture, because people are now getting into carbon markets, or they're locking up scrub, which is creating empty communities and pests and weeds havens, and they're getting these environmental projects that are actually inconsistent with the NRM regional plan, which is what the federal government commits hundreds of millions of dollars to annually to see these plans come into fruition. So one of the opportunities for the mutual when we're doing our impacts and measures regime locally is to align it with the NRM regional plans, so that we're actually aligning private market money with the government money to make sure we're not getting perverse outcomes at an overall ecological scale, but that we're aligning the interests of our government money and our private money and our landholders' activities towards an NRM plan that does say, suggest that the whole NRM region increases biodiversity by 15% over 20 years, or whatever that particular goal is. But I think if you then take to market, a carbon credit and a whole bunch of things, and you've kind of got an NRM tick of approval that this is consistent with your local measure, it's foreseeable that that's worth a premium in every environmental market as well, because the private investors are getting essentially funding that's matched and aligned with the government funding, so their money is working in the same direction. So I think there's other ways of achieving that than tidal, but tidal is one of the ways of achieving that, but we just haven't had experience with that yet. Yeah.
Okay. Let me go back to one of the things that you said in the beginning. You made the point that, carbon agents are coming in, they're saying, look, I'll do a deal with you, no upfront cost, but I want 80% of the profit.
Yeah.
That was part of the driver. When you've got an agreement with the right area, the right number of people for whatever it is you're going to do, sequester carbon, biodiversity, etc. But there still is a cost involved then. Who pays that original cost of doing the assessment and everything in the beginning then? Like, where's that money coming from?
There's sort of two answers, unfortunately. So until we have a fund established, and that's 12 to 14 months away, those pre-transaction costs are going to be borne by farmers or farm groups that are working up the transaction. But once we have...
Okay, let me ask you, can I interrupt you there then?
Yeah.
Do you have a benchmark or what you think that type of cost could be? And is it relational on area?
Yeah, it sort of loosely scales with area, but it's actually about management sites or monitoring sites. So diversity of environments actually more than hectares will play into the number of management and monitoring sites that you need to have. So essentially you would, or markets that you could enter as well. So you'd look at about $1,000 to get an initial farm assessment. Depending on what the assessment showed, you might be in for standing carbon. We know that you can work with the Carbon Farming Foundation for like $150 plus like $1 a hectare or something, and you get a carbon map that shows you on your property where you should be planting trees. And if you've got to 2 meters and 20%, according to an already populated government data set, this is how much they'll pay you for that over 25 years or 100 years. Now, your total costs for entering that market, including registering with the ERF, might be under $1,000 plus 5% to the Carbon Farming Foundation, 10% to your local, cat herder, whoever's been helping you with the transaction, and 10% to us. So that's all up like a couple of $1,000 and 25%. Okay. Yeah. And
okay.
By contrast, we're working with a group of Regen farmers in the carbonate market, and carbonate, they've got philanthropic support from the employees of JB Hi-Fi and stuff who want to see farmers transition. And essentially, when the farmer puts in their $1,000, the philanthropic money will put in $2,000, and that helps them get their initial baselining and a farm plan for the first 1,000 farmers. And we've had a talk with the Clean Energy Finance Corporation before, and we're going now to ARENA and various state governments for them to match fund the carbonate philanthropic funds, which is match funded with the farmer putting in the initial $1,000 to get $4,000 for a farm, so that you're 2 years through the program of like an environmental markets package, getting it into market, and the farmers only put $1,000 into their pocket. So we're confident that, whilst these initial farmers that are in the pilots will have to seek grants, work with charitable foundations, juggle things in order to get their pre-transaction costs going, ultimately the fund will take those costs away from farmers that are onboarding and coming into the process. But for the first 14, 15 months, we're bootstrapping it and helping these transactions get off the ground manually. Yeah.
Well, you know what it's like. You hardly remember what you say, but I can try and say it again, because I do think that I probably can't look at myself. They're doing it.
Recording in progress.
What we need to convey to farmers is, in the olden days, a farmer buys land, tries to grow something, gets remunerated for it. What your mutual is trying to explain is they own land and they're going to sell something. But now you can actually be remunerated for doing all these really important deeds that the world in a climate emergency is requiring. Sequester carbon, build biodiversity. That's the exciting part. So it's not just growing something and selling something anymore. It's being part of a much bigger ecosystem story. And it's not about being naughty, right? Not looking after the landscape, right? Being told that, you can grow something, but you have to do all these extra things. And if you don't, you're going to be punished. No, it's about embracing all the really exciting things like biodiversity, soil, getting more birds come to your farm, making sure the movement of water through your farm is beautiful and clear, and you're probably going to be storing more water in your soil at the same time. So there is something really exciting that takes the agricultural narrative out of the old, I'm going to grow something and sell something, into being much bigger, much more exciting, and you're going to be rewarded financially for it as well. Okay. Okay, that was hard seeing myself there on the screen, but it's more, I would rather do that orally than visually, Andy.
Yeah.
But I can reflect on that. But that's the thought, isn't it? That you're facilitating all the assets that a farmer has at their fingertips to build value and be remunerated. Whereas I think in the past, the whole story has been, I'm a really good farmer and please buy my wine, please buy my vegetables. And by the way, I planted an extra 2,000 trees down there. Do I get a goodie badge for doing it? Please buy my vegetables because I'm good. Now it's trying to be integrated, so that the whole picture, the whole story is integrated. And every farmer can be very proud of their environmental contribution, as opposed to being incredibly embarrassed for so many farmers for doing, appalling things. Okay. I think it's a great way to bring all those different threads together. Yeah.
Patrice, thank you. Your words are better than mine. And I, again, thank you so much for your time. And if I can get a podcast with you, I'd love to. I don't want to put something out to market that's not good quality. So yeah, if you're happy to do another.
Yeah, well, yeah, do it. I'll reflect more on it.